I guess we'll just run the camera. What questions have you got?
About liberalism or like a libertarian.
Yeah.
How would that be compared to Republican or Democratic ideology?
Well, I don't want to get too far into that question because that's not something that we've talked about in class. And I shouldn't test you on something that's only in a review session. But basically, if you remember on there, and when I put it up on the board, I had put it within the context of social issues and economic issues. So liberals are going to believe that government should have a more active role in terms of regulating the economy, but they're going to believe that the government should stay out of individual or social freedoms more. Whereas Republicans, on the other hand, are going to believe that government should regulate the social issues, but generally stay out of the economic ones. And I know that that's a broad brush, but that's kind of a beginning, starting point on that. The other thing that I would say is there was a quote that I had given y'all from the political culture chapter that I had read last week. And bear with me as I dig this up really quick. But it was talking about the red states and the blue states. This is actually on page 124. And it says here, now America seems to be two countries. One is conservative, evangelical, small town, and living in the middle of the country. It votes Republican, the red states. The other is liberal, secular, or not connected to religion, urban, and living on both coasts. It votes Democrat, the blue states. Conservatives dislike gay and women's rights, taxes, and Barack. Liberals dislike big corporations, the Iraq War, and George W. Bush. So you can look at a number of different things, but that quote is a really good one from page 124. But that difference between government regulating economic versus government regulating social is a big deal. You mentioned libertarians. Libertarians are generally going to believe in small government. And when we had talked about them, I had mentioned to you that the government that governs best is the government that governs least. So libertarians are going to believe that government should not regulate social issues. They're going to believe that government should really not regulate the moral issues, economic issues, any of it. And of course, the positive is it gives more individual freedom. But the negative is less government means more individual mistakes, probably too.
Wait, I'm kind of confused because you said that with liberalism it's economic regulation, with social not. But
yeah.
With libertarianism you said not social regulation and not economic regulation.
Right.
Completely small.
The government that governs best is the government that governs least. Yes.
So liberalism. Okay, maybe I just don't have the definition of liberalism correct. But
okay.
What is it again?
Like I said, I'm not necessarily going to try and give this grand definition, but that quote on page 124 where it says up here, the other is liberal, secular, urban, and living on both coasts. It votes Democrat, and then it mentions in here big corporations, Iraq War, and George W. But like I said, the more general thing is government is going to be more active in regulating economic issues, but it is going to be far less active in regulating social ones.
So libertarians aren't technically connected to liberalism except for the regulation of the non-regulation of the social issues.
Yeah, that's right. And see, a libertarian is basically going to be part liberal and part conservative. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. What other questions have y'all got?
So the extent of the midterm exam, so that's pretty, so I know the chapter quiz, they're both going to be covering the same topics, I guess?
No, the chapter quiz is just from the reading questions.
Just the reading
questions. And all of this is going to be terms and it's going to be articles.
So the reading questions are what we went over in class?
No, the reading questions just came from the book, and
okay.
to be honest with you, we went over very little of that in class.
Okay,
so the exam in class on Thursday is everything that we've done in class, plus State Department stuff, plus the articles.
Okay, and then reading quiz is textbook?
Yeah.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
And then this stuff that we have, the articles that we went over in class, the topics we discussed, I mean, what do you mean by State Department?
I posted and went over at the beginning of class today
Just what you said,
a click up there that says State Department.
Okay.
And there's a page, so that's all you got to know.
Cool, thank you.
What other questions do y'all have?
What are going to be the major focus points?
Well, look at the articles. I mean, the articles are stuff that we've dealt with this whole entire time. And if you go to the Nations chapter, I mean, just look at these. First of all, You'll notice in here Islamic retribution, we spent a good amount of time on. The lady with the acid, and we dealt with child labor, a relatively fair amount with Newt Gingrich talking about legalizing that. The Washington team name was probably not as big of one, talking about the NFL football team. Backlash, the taco stand article, we spent a reasonable amount of time on that. Ghana was a quickie dealing with democracy. We talked a number of things in here as far as the paid vacations were concerned, the death panels and the assisted suicide. What I would do on these is, if you go in, and bear with me, because I probably have too many things open. In chapter 4, dealing with states, if you remember, we had welfare state, laissez-faire, we had a number of socialism and statism. Those basically, the two questions were, how much should government regulate the economy and how much should the government redistribute? And then I gave you articles that kind of demonstrated some of these different concepts. So like statism was the one that was basically saying that you're there in order to benefit the state, and if you're not benefiting the state, then technically speaking, you're making it worse. Well, if you remember the death panels, do you remember the death panels article?
Was that like the group deciding on someone to
Yeah.
be
Be
killed?
really, really specific with the death panel article. I mean, it basically lays out that you would go before the God Committee. It lays out in there that there were doctor, religious, homemaker, union person, lawyer, a number of people that were on the committee. And what was it when they decided that you would get the medical treatment or if you wouldn't? What was the number one thing?
It was benefit to society.
Your social worth. Yeah, so be able to explain that within the context of statism. Or the assisted suicide article, and that one was a little bit different. The assisted suicide article, if you remember, was the one that was talking about the old man and the old woman. The old woman they'd been married for almost 50 years. She had a terminal condition. He was just aging. He was not, of any particular health issue. And ultimately, both of them chose to do assisted suicide. And there was an outcry as far as whether or not he should have chosen to do it. At the bottom of that article, if you remember, it started talking a little bit about some of the sinister pieces to this. And bear with me as I pull this up. But it's basically up here saying, if we allow assisted suicide for people whose only affliction is being old, we want a huge risk that greedy relations will put pressure on the elderly to choose to die for the convenience and enrichment of the heirs. And then you'll notice up here it starts getting into some other things. So make sure that you go through and read through these articles pretty good. Like I said, some of them you're going to see that we spent a good amount of time on. When we were talking about, and going back to the terms really quick, we were talking about politics. And so politics was one of the first big terms from the chapter. A really good example of that was Islamic retribution, where, if you remember, she had acid thrown on her. She went to court in Iran, and she was ultimately able to win so that she could drop acid in his eyes. Now, granted, he was sedated, it wouldn't have been the same thing, but it would have blinded him. And this was a big victory for women in Iran that, in fact, she won a case like this. And then, do you remember what happened when it went to appeal?
She couldn't do it.
Well, she didn't do it, but do you remember what happened on appeal? Because she won this idea, and retribution is basically the idea that if somebody does something to you, you get the right to be able to do it back. Well, do you remember what happened when she went to court? She won, and then it was appealed. They said that one woman's eye, or two women's eyes, is only equal to one man's eye. So even though she won a big victory, it still wasn't really about equality. And this is about politics, because there were some of you in here that were like, you know what, we can't do this, this is barbaric. There were others of you in here that said, listen, you know what, she's been kind of relegated to a prison herself. She should be allowed to do this kind of a thing. So link it up that way. Child labor was the same way. Do you remember what Newt Gingrich was saying?
He was saying that children should be able to work at early age.
He said children, and in what specifically? What was his plan?
It was the inner city kids and one of them to work in their schools.
Yeah, it was. The Gingrich article was basically dealing with the schools. And what he said was that he said, listen, not everybody is really going to be college material. He said, to be honest with you, when you get into certain areas of the country, we need to rebuild the very ethic of work. So we need to take some of these kids and we need to begin to get them working maybe in a trade, or we need to get them working in a way that will benefit the school. It will save the school money, it will give them some money, teach them about work, give them some self-respect. And he was talking about maybe being janitors in schools, maybe doing yard work around the schools, this kind of a thing, working in the cafeteria. If you remember, there were other people that were like, listen, no. I mean, they need to be kids first. Their job is supposed to be to go to school. And there also was that veiled idea of racism where, okay, you know, if you're just going to be picking on the inner city kids and the poor, well, what about kids that are in other schools that are maybe wealthier or whatever the case might be? Does this mean that they're not going to get this? I mean, we're kind of seems like we're relegating it to certain people. But give the article a good read through. And then if you remember on this, there was also the, there was a video for this one as well. And when you go into chapter 4 videos, you'll see up there, there's the Newt Gingrich and the child labor thing. So kind of keep that in mind. What else do y'all have, I guess, as far as questions?
I have a question about what you were just saying about what made your
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wouldn't working in schools and learning a trade be two different things? I mean,
It could be, and again, it kind of depends on how far they would go. And I don't want to get into a whole bunch of like the semantics of it just because we're reviewing. But effectively, he's saying, I mean, if you watch the video, they're starting to talk about maybe we need to focus these kids on other things. Maybe this will spark an interest in them more than maybe some of the academic subjects. Yeah. What else have y'all got?
Sorry, hold on a second. So how much, and could you like give us a divvy up? Because I know you mentioned multiple parts to the midterm exam, the article that we talked about.
Yeah.
So, well, how much would each of those be worth?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing it today. But what I would ask you to do is to write as specifically as you can with the articles.
As much detail as possible.
As much detail as
So
possible.
you recommend having those articles down to a fine point?
Yeah, the ones that we spent the most time on. And that's what I'm saying. I mean, some of these things we really did talk for 20 or 30 minutes on. Some of them, like the Ghana one, for example, was just really, really quick.
And it'll be mainly short responses?
There'll be a mixture of 5 and 10 point questions, and you will have some degree of choice. So I'll probably give you 55 points of questions, and you'll answer 35 points.
And then the rest will be like what, multiple choice? Or?
And yeah, there will be other things that will be multiple choice. I'm not sure how many that will be yet.
Is there going to be an essay?
The short answers are essays, yes.
Okay, all right. I was asking if we need one long essay or all.
You know, it really depends on what you write. I mean, some people are going to write 2 or 3 sentences, and that's probably not advised. Some people are going to write more, but the trick on this really is to show me what you know. So if you only write 3 or 4 sentences and we spent 20 or 30 minutes on something, that's probably bad. Okay. So show me what you know. And there will probably be some details in these articles that maybe we didn't cover in class. I mean, just because we didn't talk about it doesn't mean that it's not fair game. So if you decide that you want to write about some things we didn't talk about, that's okay. But just, you know, I'm not looking for your opinion too. You know, I'm looking for you to be able to give me both sides and then ultimately be able to tell me who won.
So yeah, okay, just a broad spectrum.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. What else have y'all got?
So the multiple choice will be on the terms and vocabulary, whatever?
The terms and the articles, yes.
Okay.